infrastructure and amenity improvements that boost tourism and expand the audience of Canal users. This year, we're placing an emphasis on projects and events that improve access for all community members and that help fill gaps in local services and amenities along the canal. Today's workshop is designed to inspire you and equip you with practical initiatives that you can incorporate into your projects to ensure that all potential visitors can engage fully. Funding is open to counties, municipalities, units of local government, not-for-profit organizations, and federally recognized Native American tribes located within the boundaries of the National Heritage Corridor. The application window opens on October 14th, and the deadline to apply is November 27th. Awardees will be announced in February 2026. Once the application window opens on October 14th, a link to apply via the online application portal grants will be available on the Erie Canalway Grants Resources page. We will put a link for that in the chat. Next, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Sasha from New York State Canal Corporation.
Great, thank you, Mary. Hi, everyone. I'm Sasha Del Perel. I'm from the New York State Canal Corporation, as Mary mentioned. I'm the trail manager, but I also have the privilege of working on this grant program as well as some other recreational programming. The Canal Corporation is a state agency that's responsible for operating, maintaining, and promoting the 524 miles of the New York State canal systems, as well as the land-based asset, the Erie Canal and Champlain Canalway Trails. Mary mentioned already that this is a joint program between the Canal Corporation and Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor. We've been partners with Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor for nearly 2 decades now. We do a number of programming and promotional efforts, and this program is just one example of the many impactful partnership programs that we run together. I would encourage you to check them out visiting our partnership website. But we're here today to talk about grants, and we're in the 5th year of administering this and working with Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor. We've established a set of program objectives for both the tourism infrastructure and amenities grants, as well as the events grant side of this program. Mary, can you put the slide deck up on the screen? The TIA, or do we not have? Okay, that's okay. I'll go through anyways. We've set up we have a list of objectives for the grant program, and these objectives include facilitating recreation and/or tourism, enhancing visitor amenities, and improving visitor experience. We want to encourage overnight stays, commemorate the history and heritage and culture of the canals, make recreation tourism assets more accessible for people with disabilities, as well as expand the audiences served. And lastly, improve and promote connectivity between recreational areas, communities, and between waterway and land trails. And I want to mention a few of our eligible program categories. That includes enhancements or restoration of existing features or infrastructure, the installation of wayfinding signage. We are also supportive of the preservation and conservation of canal-specific historical, cultural, natural resources, as well as the enhancements that improve access and connection to the canal system. And lastly, connecting services, paying for contracted services, including garbage removal, porta johns, bike and paddlecraft rental services. So a complete list of the objectives and program categories can be found in the program guide, which we'll link to in this chat. Please take a look at this document before you start your application, as there have been some changes since last year's grant round. A few updates that I want to point out before we move into today's workshop is that we've added a resource page to the bottom of the guide. This includes design guidelines and recommended best practices. A description for each resource is provided in that guide, so you can kind of know what you're digging into before you have to, read a guide. And if you have any questions, email Mary about it. And secondly, we've placed additional questions about site information and ownership in this year's application. As reviewers, it's really critical for us to understand where exactly your project is taking place, particularly if you are not the site owner, and also if you are proposing something on Canal Corporation land. We require a support letter from the property owner. If that project is occurring on Canal Corporation property, it doesn't need to be a support letter, but it needs to be a written correspondence that placement is agreeable to our staff. Instructions for that are listed in the program guide. And we're also requiring site layouts and asking for any renderings or drawings you may have of your project. That's important to us. So as you start developing your project, please think about that and keep that in mind. And lastly, but obviously not least, we're placing additional emphasis on accessibility. And that's the whole point of today's discussion. We want to educate potential applicants on what they can do to be welcoming to people of all abilities. And the application has been updated this year to ask specific questions about your accessibility measures. And we've also provided resources for best practices. Additional points will be provided to applicants that show that they are intending and have built in accessibility into their designs. And so now, without taking up too much time, I'll pass it over to Jonathan White, the Director of Design Consulting at the Center of Inclusive Design and Environmental Access at the University of Buffalo. Jonathan's work focuses on evaluating and creating practical solutions for inclusive design in public spaces. And Jonathan's been with the center for nearly 2 decades now, and we are very, very thrilled to have him here today to share his wealth of knowledge and help educate all of us on how to make our canal system and its communities a place that can be enjoyed by all. So thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much for having me. So again, my name is Jonathan White, University of Buffalo's Center for Inclusive Design and Environmental Access. And today I'll be talking about the universal design of different recreational amenities that many of you might be including in some of your applications for improvements along the canal. I'd like to start by talking about what universal design is not, to talk about a little bit about the difference between accessibility, minimum legal requirements, and universal design. So we'll start with that. We'll go into what our definition and the goals of universal design are, who benefits from universal design, and then we'll spend a good portion going over some examples of universal design in recreational type of environments. First, a little bit about ourselves. Who is the Center for Inclusive Design and Environmental Access? Well, a research center at the School of Architecture and Planning at the University of Buffalo. We've been around since 1984. Our mission is to produce knowledge and tools to increase quality of life for groups who've been marginalized by traditional design practices. So like I said, we're a research center. So one of the things we've done, and since 1999, we've held federal grants on universal design in the built environment. The building you're seeing on the screen now, we developed universal design standards for. So again, how to go beyond minimum accessibility and have true universal design. We've also done grants on accessible public transportation. We held this grant for 15 years as well, looking at, boarding platforms and bus design and all of that, and the entire travel chain from home to destination. We do research on things like ramp slopes. There's an image on the screen now of one of the buses we built in our lab as part of the accessible public transportation. We were testing ramp slope using motion capture, but we also do private research, such as testing ATMs for visually impaired users, developing model homes for the Wounded Warrior Project, development activities such as developing model homes for universal design, tactile navigation systems like the one on the screen now from at Google's headquarters to navigate around the floor. And we do design consulting, which is we're most of my focus is, in addition to the development activities related to universal design standards. So we've designed over 1,000 home modifications for people with disabilities. I personally will go around and provide accessibility consulting and universal design consulting. So we have clients who will contact us. They need to know what the minimum requirements are, whether it's housing or public rights of way. Sometimes it's lawsuit related, and so folks find us and they reach out to us to go and measure that built environment, like that, measuring that handrail that we see in the image there, and then the bottom image on the right is Museum Lab, which is a universally designed certified building. That building I showed earlier, where we're developing universal design standards. We finally we got the draft standards together. We put them out and we created a certification program called Innovative Solutions for Universal Design, which I'll put up on the screen at the end. And so we helped consult to design this building to be universally designed. And it's a service that we offer really to anybody who's looking to, say, hey, here's our plans. Can you tell us what we could do to make better, improve our building, improve our playground, to make it more accessible and universally designed. We also provide training such as online courses. And of course, since we're in the School of Architecture Planning, I'm currently teaching a studio and a seminar there as well as part of the Inclusive Design Research Group. So my background, again, is in architecture by practice. I'm also a certified accessibility consultant as well. So I'd like to first talk about what universal design is not, and I've alluded to it a little bit so far. Universal design is not the same thing as accessibility. Accessibility is, of course, required to be universally designed. If we're going to include everybody, that includes people with disabilities, of course. But it's not the same thing as accessible design, barrier-free design, assistive technology, and that sort of thing. Universal design is more beneficial for everyone. Sometimes it might involve assistive technology or ergonomic design, but it's more of an evolutionary approach. There's really no end state. There's no, you could always design better for larger groups of people. So it's very process oriented. So just as an example, as how universal design is not the same as accessibility, this was a picnic area along a stream or river, where there were some picnic areas down this wooden ramp, down closer to the river. But aside from this ramp, the terrain wasn't very accessible to get to those picnic areas. So they placed an accessible picnic table up in the parking lot where this picture is taken. And then what happened is that they found that everybody liked to use that picnic table because it was closer to the vehicles, you're moving coolers and stuff. And then when people with disabilities would show up, they wouldn't be able to use it. So then they created this local ordinance, and they put up a sign that says this picnic area is only for people with disabilities and prohibits use by others. And so, yeah, it's accessible. They have an accessible picnic table. They solve the problem by creating this ordinance, but it's not really universally designed, right? And universal design would make sure that multiple picnic tables are accessible. Or if they realize that lots of people like the picnic tables in this area, they would provide more of them up here, or provide accessible picnic tables with everybody else. They wouldn't segregate uses. So this chart here just shows a little bit of the difference between accessibility and universal design. So accessibility, you might have a recreational space that has the minimum number of accessibility features. So whatever percentage, 5% of your picnic tables are accessible. In universal design, the culture is inspired by the mission of including people in all features and amenities. And so when you're buying those picnic tables, you just buy all of them to be accessible. Accessibility might not provide any special effort to provide services for a range of needs or preferences, and upgrade only facilities only as needed, right? So you might have a restroom facility that was designed prior to the ADA in the 1980s or something like that. And well, we weren't required by law to upgrade that, although most municipalities and state organizations really should have. But there's all sorts of exceptions. It says in existing facilities don't need to do this or that or make these upgrades. But in universal design, you would say, you know what? These aren't accessible. They're old enough. They're due for upgrades anyway. Let's make them accessible and go beyond that. Let's provide additional features for everybody. Again, accessibility might provide only the ADA required accessible routes and percentage of accessible features, but universal design makes sure that all features have a greater level of access with little or no need for accommodations. Accessibility, the bathrooms might, comply with ADA, but in universal design, they'll exceed those requirements, providing additional space clearances and high levels of convenience, privacy, and sensory enhancement for all. So what is our definition of universal design? Universal design is a process that enables and empowers a diverse population by improving human performance, health and wellness, and social participation. In short, it makes life easier, healthier, and friendlier for all. And just a little bit of a note on terminology. You might have heard the term universal design, and you see at the bottom of the screen our center's name, Center for Inclusive Design and Environmental Access. Both terms reflect the same concept and philosophy and can be used interchangeably. Design for all is another common term that's used in Europe to describe that same sort of philosophy. So we don't really make a distinction between those two terms. So if you hear me jump back and forth between the two terms, know that we chose the term inclusive design for our center a while back, and then the federal government had the term universal design, and that's what they get for grants. And so we sort of use both terms. So what are the goals of universal design? What are we trying to achieve? So here I have the definition of universal design that I just gave you. And next to that are those 3 improvement areas. This is what we want to improve: human performance, health, wellness, and social participation. And so from these, we developed goals that designers can hope to achieve, sort of act as a guiding force when we're designing something. So the first goal is body fit. Does the design accommodate a wide range of body sizes and abilities? So this isn't just necessarily something like providing minimum clearances. Are we actually providing that fit? So on the screen now is a raised planting bed. And it provides knee and toe clearance at different heights. One of those heights is probably the minimum wheelchair knee clearance height requirement. But then they have lower heights for, let's say, children to use, people even with larger wheelchairs. And in terms of accessibility, they really would have just needed to provide an accessible route alongside of this garden bed. But here they said, let's provide actual access to it underneath as well, right? So body fit is about designing for the extremes of the bell curves, not just the middle, right? We're not looking to design for the average person. If we design for the person at the low end and the high end of the bell curve, then we'll ideally accommodate everybody in the middle as well. We can also design for choice, design for the average with accommodations. We're looking to break with, typical precedents. And so design for choice might be something like this, where we have different heights, maybe different seating heights, different table heights, or different heights for the garden. The next goal of universal design is comfort. Are the demands of the design within desirable limits of body function and perception? And so this is more about biomechanics and what's comfortable. So this could be something as, is the seat comfortable? But it also might be things like providing lighting, a comfortable temperature, acoustics. In this case here, there's these shade structures that actually will, that help provide shade in the hot summer sun, give people a place to rest. I'm always amazed the number of times I'll go to playgrounds and there's no shade or seating at all. And well, who brings kids to the playgrounds? Well, sometimes grandparents come and bring their kids to the playgrounds, or even somebody who's not a grandparent himself still likes to sit down while my kid is on the playground for an hour, right? And not be in the hot sun, right? So it's about keeping within those desirable limits. The next goal is awareness. Does the design ensure that critical information for use is perceived easily, right? So what's on the screen now is a sign that's giving information about the pathways along a trail system. And it shows icons showing which ones have viewing points, which ones have parking, which ones are accessible or require walking. through the use of these accessibility symbols. It clearly gives the rules using pictograms as to no bicycles or dogs allowed, the name of the lookout, and the approximate amount of time and length of each trail. So people can decide for themselves whether or not they want to go down that trail. Yes, it might be wheelchair accessible, but if it's a 2-hour trail, somebody might say, you know what, as somebody who's walking with a cane or crutches, that maybe is not something for me. But, oh, I see it's maybe only about 15 minutes to the lookout, and I can confirm that based on the measurement that they've shown there and knowing my abilities, you're providing that information for them to use that. The next goal is understanding, making methods of operation and use intuitive and clear. So this is going beyond awareness, but making sure people actually understand how to use something. The example on the screen now is a tactile map that if you touch the buildings, this is at the National Mall in Washington, you touch the building, it tells you information about the building. You can learn more and more about the building and actually get directions and understand how to get around. So awareness is about perceiving information, where understanding is more about cognition, understanding what to do with that. So are there design affordances so people know how to operate something, like maybe a tricky latch on a gate or something like that? Is it clear how to operate it? You might use well-known conceptual models, like on a faucet where the cold is always on the right and the hot is always on the left. And it helps support the construction of accurate mental maps. So can people, let's say you had a trail system, that map, it might be kind of confusing, that trail system. So are there ways that we're making that easy? You've got the map at the beginning, maybe they're color coded, maybe they're colored and numbered, so that people might remember the color and see the number on the marker and be able to figure that sort of thing out and create their own mental map of where they're going. The next goal is awareness. Does the design contribute to health promotion, avoidance of disease, and protection from hazards? This example here is, a nice walking trail. It has places to sit and rest, nice and smooth. It's not covered with tree roots and all of that sort of thing. Provides access to nature. You're seeing here on the screen something that we've done at one of the playgrounds that had a similar type of trail, where people are given little instructions along the trail. Go into a warrior pose, that's a yoga pose, and giving them things to do along the trail. I've seen this also with biking. They'll have stations where you could do exercise, you could bike, you could stop and do exercise along the trail. It encourages people to get out and trail and use their abilities, and just encourages active living and a healthy lifestyle. The next goal is social integration, treating all groups with dignity and respect. One of the ways you might do that is by not segregating routes for people with disabilities from routes for everybody else. So in this case here, this is an example of a museum. They have lots of landscaping, and they're trying to give people a tour of all the different unique native plants to the region. One thing that they could have done was provide, a straight walkway through this with stairs on one side, and then they found that the ramp was going to be too steep. So what they said was, let's zigzag the ramp through it. Let's carve it into the landscape. Everybody can do that, and then everybody gets a full view of all of the plants, not just one side. They can see the plants from the side, from behind, and they're all progressing through that together. And then, of course, notice there are also resting places and benches along the way. And the trail is well lit, has handrails and that sort of thing as well. But everybody experiences this together in the same way. Personalization. Does the design have opportunities for choice and expression of individual preferences? People want to be able to achieve their personal goals. And so that might be something, for example, like having access to information in different ways. So is it provided in text, in Braille, in pictogram? Maybe there's a mobile app telling you, how to get there as well. That app could then provide audio information, an audio tour of the place as well. And so people can get that information in different ways. They could read the sign, they could listen to the tour on the app, and hear about things that way. And then cultural appropriateness, respecting and reinforcing the social and environmental context. The image here is the Central Museum in Utrecht, Netherlands. And here, this was a very old building. It is like 1,000 years old. It was an old convent. And it housed a lot of important artifacts and other things that provide access to the history and culture of the place. And so they wanted to provide access to that without destroying that. And, sometimes providing accessibility can, really damage the look of the building. And so what they did is they decided to sensitively insert this glass tower that acts as a circulation element at the back of the building here along this courtyard that stands separate from the historic architecture of the building, but then provides these inserts into the building to make sure that people of all abilities can have access to the history and culture of the place. And we see that a lot, particularly the Canal, a very historic structure which has all sorts of information about it, and how can we make sure we're providing access to things like those locks and other things, which often do have stairs and other ways of getting around. So there is that definition again with those improvement areas, and we sort of categorize these goals into those improvement areas. So who benefits from universal design? Well, children benefit from universal design because it provides increased safety and security. Adults, just in terms of reducing stress, not worrying about getting lost on that hiking trail. Older people by providing support for independence. People with disabilities, again, by supporting their need for independence. People of various sizes and statures and sensitivities. People who are very tall and very short, left-handed or chemically sensitive. People with non-physical characteristics, different income, gender, cultural, and educational differences, or non-obvious disabilities, invisible disabilities that you might look at somebody and not know that they have a disability, but they might have ADHD, PTSD, epilepsy, or something else. Some people, will criticize, they see somebody park in an accessible parking spot and say, well, that person doesn't look like they have a disability. And what they don't know is they have a lung condition that doesn't allow them to walk long distances. So at the end of the day, we're all beneficiaries. We could all have different disabilities or be disabled or enabled by our environment at different times. If you go to some Greek ruins, you might see that some of the steps are like 2 feet tall. That'd be a difficult stair to climb, even for more able-bodied individuals, right? And we could have a temporary disability. We could break our leg. We could be carrying lots of things around, backpacks or packages. People who have glasses actually have a visual impairment that's corrected with an assistive technology. For every set of people, one has or knows someone with a disability. And people with disabilities want to be treated just like everyone else. They don't want to have a big deal made of making arrangements. And so whatever we could do to help and keep it low key, no one wants to be the unwanted center of attention. So what are some examples? I like to think about those 8 goals in terms of sort of these 3 experiential parts. Arriving, your experience while there, and comfort. Can I get there? Can I participate? And then can I stay there as long as I want? So let's walk through each of those. First, arrival. Can I get there? So is the entrance appropriately marked? Do prominent signs indicate the name and the place? Are they perpendicular, angled to be visible from the direction of approach? Visible from all the routes that you might take. Sometimes there's a sign that's visible to vehicles, but not on the bike trail or the walking path that might be segregated. Are they double-sided so they can be viewed from both directions? Sometimes people put up signs and they're angled to be visible from town, but not angled to be visible from the other direction. This also includes parking areas, and make sure that those are accessible. A lot of times we see gravel lots and other things, and they'll put up an accessible sign on the gravel lot, and it's not really accessible. Right, so making sure that that paved parking area is accessible, does it have the proper slope and markings, signs at the appropriate height. In this case here, there's no step to get to the sidewalk, so they provided bollards to make sure that vehicles don't go and overhang the sidewalk or drive up onto the sidewalk and block the route. And of course, they're all clearly marked. In this case, I should also point out, notice the access aisles are only 5 feet wide. In New York State, they're required to be 8 feet. Pedestrian access. Are their routes direct and clear? Have we provided that route? Sometimes we'll see a parking area and then there's like a grass strip to get over to the pathways and other things. In this case, there's a parking area that has a different material, concrete material, going down the park, going down the route, separated with plantings, lets everybody know that this is the parking and it's a direct, straight route into the building. Or we accommodate different modes of transportation. This goes to the wellness category, allowing bicyclists and other things, making sure that those routes are clear and identified and separate, when possible, separate from the vehicular ways. There's actually also tactile guide strips here as well, that blind people can use to follow the intended route, you know, especially important in large open areas or plazas. Is the entrance clear to identify? We shouldn't necessarily always need signs. Signs are important sometimes, but if you need a sign that says entrance this way, sometimes you might think, well, maybe it hasn't been designed very clearly on how to get there. Think, how can I design without needing signs? What makes it clear that this is the right path to take? Well, I bet to find the entrance, I need to go in between these columns here and under those archways. Sometimes it could be something as simple as this, you know, having this framed archway. And things like this also help provide, photo points. People take their picture under this sign, and it can be used as a branding opportunity. They take that, they post it on social media and other things as well. So you can then, you know, if this were along the New York State canals, you could have New York State canals, you know, somewhere in that picture. People be like, oh, that's where they're at. You know, so these architectural features can help make it clear and obvious, you know, and they can find that trailhead from a distance. I can't tell you the number of times I've arrived at trailheads and from the parking area and you see a line of trees and I'm going, where's the actual trail there? And it's a line of trees across the field and I'm not sure where do you actually enter? So the next part is the experience. Can I participate? If it's a playground, can I play? We sort of stole this from a playground design guide where they said, can I play? Can I participate when I'm there? And so what does this mean? So one thing might be the design of the signs themselves, making sure you've got good hierarchy of information, detailed information. I showed that example earlier on this. Maybe there's audio descriptions, virtual tours. Using plain language, you can go to plainlanguage.gov and learn how to use language that is clear. Sometimes we try to be really smart and we say really big words on signs when smaller words will do, that everybody, including children, can understand. Using pictograms, having high contrast, and then consistency in signage so people are clear. This is an identification. This sign is the same color and the same size and same font everywhere, and it's always accompanied by the pictogram. And every time we have camp, we use the same pictogram. If there's a numbered and colored route, that number always follows that same color on the maps and on the trails and on the signs everywhere, right? So just as an example, these are typical ADA signs you might find in a building that identify restrooms and locations. Yes, they meet the ADA, but maybe signs like this might give more information. They're color coded. They've got these diagrams so people can really quickly see what they need to see. Directional signs. These signs are very clear that they point in the direction of travel. They have a white edge to highlight the edge of the sign. They give the distance of the trail and the trail number as well. So simply providing this, anytime trails or pathways intersect, great idea to have a directional sign there. Even if you don't think it's important to let people know what's off that little side street. Oh, that just goes back to the parking lot. Well, put that parking lot that way. Letting people know which trails are accessible and which ones aren't. Sometimes this gets a little tricky and we'll provide some guidance at the end in terms of outdoor trails and recreational facilities and certain exceptions that you can use when planning. Is this trail going to be accessible? Doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be paved, but definitely would need to be a firm, stable surface. I showed this picture earlier, just making sure you're providing information when they're there so that they can participate. This is actually a map of a playground that shows where things are on the map. Gets kids familiar with using a map. It's all in Braille. Just shows where the different things are. Shows where the restrooms are. And each of these surfaces, not only is it Braille, but the map is also tactile. It's got dotted lines and raised surfaces so that people can feel their way around. Maybe perhaps even additional information about the trail. Not just the distance, but the rules, who yields to who. Elevation change is important sometimes on trails. It might be a really short trail, like, oh, it's just a 1 mile trail, but if it's really steep, some people might not be able to do that and decide that they don't want to go down that trail. And again, tactile maps. I showed different versions of this earlier. This is in the medical campus as well. We have some examples here of, I'm not going to bore you too much with too many technical details today, but there are guides like this, and I'll put the resource I got this from up at the end. This is for federal trails. How long a trail segment can be before you need a resting area. And so we see here, natural trails might be steeper than the 1 to 20 or 5% slope that you might find in a typical accessible building, right? And so you could maybe call this trail accessible even though it's steeper than that, but I would provide that sort of information. And so this is what the federal government uses for determining in their federal parks, when they're designing a natural trail. So this you can see is a little bit steeper than what the ADA actually typically would allow. But what is that trail surface material made out of? It could be paved and still look nice and natural, right? Here's a concrete pathway that meanders through a wooded area, and it doesn't really distract too much from that natural area. Of course, that can get expensive. So there are other ways of doing that. So crushed rock rather than uncrushed gravel can be used. Rocks with broken faces rather than rounded rock. A rock mixture with a full spectrum of sieve sizes, including fine material rather than a single size. Having hard rock rather than soft rock that breaks down easily. There's all sorts of other things like, having a rock that passes through a 1/2-inch screen, compacted 3 to 4 inches thick. Materials that moist but not too wet before compacted, and that is actually compacted using a vibrating plate instead of laid loose and compacted by use or hand tamping. So something like this, for example, even though it's made of small pieces, it's difficult to compact because it's all across this wide area. Has rounded faces, it's in a thick layer. And so it moves around. We see a lot of this sort of thing in playgrounds. It's just like a very thick area where they just dumped a whole bunch of round stones. And so it's pretty much impossible to use. You feel like you're sinking into it. And so there are methods you can use for that sort of thing, proper surface preparation before putting this down, having a substrate. And there's some examples on the screen here about the thickness of that and those technical details. But also people love boardwalks. And so you can provide a walking surface like this, that's a boardwalk, and that can also be really nice as well. This last one here, this was a Shoreline Aquatic Park in Long Beach. I'm not sure where this one was taken. So provide, boardwalk to nice scenic views rather than, it's tough to, in this case, it's a sandy area. So providing that crushed stone, that'll wash away really fast, right? So, they're thinking about, the area and what they need. This is a nature sanctuary in Central Park. Notice here it's got very clearly defined path edges. So let's say you were blind and going through a nature trail. You're using your cane. This has got nice path edges, and they're made of blocks. So it meets, matches with the nature. And this looks like a mulch. In fact, it is mulch, which would not be all that accessible, but there's like a resin sort of compound mixed with this mulch that is being used to provide it a more firm, stable, rubberized surface and prevent it from falling away. You also want to consider things like, lighting, trail markers, benches, and other things along the way. These can also all serve as landmarks, right? Oh, I've seen that bench before. Oh, that bench, the red bench. Yeah, we've passed that before. I think we're going in a circle. Providing access. This is also that engineered wood fiber as well. Notice there's a curb down at the end, to prevent anxiety about the wheelchair user going down into the water. It's not that steep of a slope here, but the wheelchair user in this case said, yeah, I really liked that curb was there. It gave me a sense of safety when I saw that I wasn't going to go into the water at the end of this. beach access mats, can be used on areas like this. But you can't just throw it down over, whatever shape the beach is and have it all lumpy like I've seen before. You want to smooth out the ground, compact it and all of that, and then roll it out. And then have transition areas between the mats. So we see this metal transition where the mat joins with the concrete here so it doesn't sink down or create this lip that now people can't get over. And then they should also be secured, they're staked down to the ground as well, so they don't move as much. This is an example of providing actual beach access, a beach access chair. And so they've got a concrete surface here that looks like it's gotten a little covered with sand as people have walked over it. But they've got a route to this beach access chair is actually providing access right into the water. This is an example of a playground that is designed as an inclusive playground. And there are bathrooms that are designed to be inclusively designed bathrooms, but they built the bathrooms later and then nobody put in the contract that we should maybe connect to them. So you've got this nice inclusive playground, inclusive bathrooms, and no connection between them. There is an asphalt path that goes out and around, all the way down and around, and it's kind of lumpy, and it's like the old asphalt path that had been there prior to then building the playground. So it's not great. So there is a route, but it's not what I would call accessible. Right? So you want to think about, the arrival point, but then getting there and connecting all the elements on site in a logical and intuitive way. Here's an example of what we call a heroic effort to provide access. If this is what you need to provide access, this is not very helpful. Might meet your legal obligations if it's all the right slope and everything, but let me tell you, this would be very tiring for, even if you're walking this is a long route to walk back and forth to get up. So if this is the means of access, I would consider what are the other possibilities. Should we be providing a lift at this point? Is there a building that, is there a building on site that can be used where we have an elevator inside the building that's connecting these two levels or something to that effect, or parking areas at the top and bottom of whatever this area is. Another bad example here. It seems like they had good intentions. We're going to, keep the steps and the ramp together. But it's really dangerous for the people using the stairs and dangerous for the people using the ramp. The ramp doesn't have handrails, and it creates tripping hazards and uneven surfaces as you're going up and down the stairs. So you can't get a comfortable gait going. Now to some good things, thinking about exhibitions. This is an example of like a treehouse type exhibition where they provided not just the boardwalk, but play areas, so some netting, and they provide an accessible route all the way around this area. This is at the Wild Center. This one here, I think this is a different one than just pictured. This is at the Wild Center up in, I want to say Old Forge, or near Old Forge, New York. So providing, views out amongst the trees, maybe, boardwalks like this help do that. There can also act as landmarks for people who are on the trails down below. Notice there's seating and there's umbrellas and other things. They provide engaging opportunities that make people want to come there and use this, right? If this wasn't here and it was just like a trail through the trees, people would be like, do I want to go there? But here now it's an activity. We want to bring our kids there and everything else. And then are we thinking about people with different sensory issues? Is it just about climbing and playing? But are we, here we could listen for birds. And so they have this apparatus here that heightens that. I've seen playgrounds now where kids can talk to each other through these tubes that are in the ground. And they think that's really fun, or musical instruments and other things. Here we again have a topographic relief map so people can actually feel, those peaks on the mountains as they're looking out at them. Help understand the geography, scale of a location. But also it can even help people with mobility, impairments see, oh, that might be too steep for me. And, it's a very low-tech way and quiet way of providing that information. This direction here, so there's a viewfinder here. This is about flower and bird viewing. And so they've got this viewfinder here that everyone can use, even people if you're low vision, but also just anybody who wants to see something up close that they're reading about here. Are we providing alternative formats for publications? Making sure that we're providing equivalent views from accessible viewing areas as others. This was the case for the national parks. There was this viewing area that was down below here, but there was only stairs to access it just because of the natural steep terrain. And so you see the before picture over on the left, and you can see that platform down below, the view from up above wasn't as good. So they went and said, okay, can we provide an equivalent view from up above? You know, we just have to remove a tree here or there, and now we can provide a similar view. Another example of sensory. So this is, again, at the National Mall. This is the Vietnam Memorial, I believe. And all the names are etched into the wall, which provides, you know, a tactile experience as well. And of course, this you know, being able to feel it was just part of the nature of the exhibit here as well. You know, it provides just that greater connection to those who died. Let's move on to accessible boating. So sometime along the canal, a lot of boating opportunities. People want to kayak and that sort of thing. So here's an example of that, of an accessible kayak launch. This is in Pittsford, New York. So there's a gangway ramp that looks a little steep to me at this point, probably because of the, it might, you know, just water levels. So make sure you're considering that as you're doing this, but it looks like they've got like this lower platform here that might rise with the water, and then another ramp to connect to the actual kayak area. And what might that kayak area have? There's really no ADA requirements for a kayak area. You just need to make it accessible, right? You can't just have like a, you know, grass just drop off and say, this is our kayak launch. So what might you do? In this case, they decided to build what's called transfer steps. You see this at pools and playground equipment. So they provided transfer steps with a railing, and they followed those requirements, the pool transfer steps or playground transfer step requirements. And then they provided a holding area for the boat with handrails. I've also seen these with actual, you know, up high, you know, higher grab rails with these like straps that hang down, like you might see on a bus or subway. You know, these straps that hang down that people can hold on to as they lower themselves in. Here's another example of that, something similar, you know, a holding area and transfer steps. And then there's this grab bar on the other side to be able to pull oneself across. Notice there's a curb here as well, that keeps people from rolling off the edge. And this is just a different view of that same area. This is also like a fishing platform as well. So there's lowered areas in the bar there for that. Oh, good. I do have an example of that. So here's some of the straps that you could use. So they're not in your way as you're coming down. Here they've got the handrail, you know, over top. All right. So there's no real requirements here, but there are things you can look at in the guides to sort of glean, you know, what could we do? So there's that. Then here is another example. This is on Oswego. There's a little ramp that you could slide the kayak down. How are you going to carry this big kayak over all of those ramps? That first example I showed had sort of a gangway and a second ramp, but you got to now carry the kayak down to that and around the corner. So here they've decided to make it level. And you can see a sort of similar apparatus here with the transfer steps and railings that go up overhead. In boating facilities, this is an adaptive sailing program. They actually have a hoist lift, and they have modified boats that actually a person in a wheelchair, with assistance in this case, you know, board the boat using the lift. So, and what's challenging, you know, each boat is different, so each has unique entry conditions and deck heights, and is changing water height. We also recommend having ladders anywhere you've got openings in a dock. Provide a ladder to get back to the dock, you know. So that people, if they fall in, they can get out. Again, I'm trying not to bore you too much with too much technical details today. So, you know, here's some examples of an accessible boarding platform. The section numbers here, I believe, are ADA section numbers. You know, 60 inches wide. You can have 60-inch wide openings at the boat boarding areas. that can be obstructed. You can have little obstructions like this where that 60-inch width gets narrowed down. I wouldn't say that's a universal design, but they have that where you can reduce to 36 inches wide as long as you don't do it too often. Is basically the gist of this image here. And then curves. Well, what should that curve be? It's about 2 to 4 inches in height, 2 inches wide maximum. And playgrounds. So this playground here, this is the one that I showed the map of earlier. Got a nice defined path that gives kids a place to orient themselves and find their way around. Different color-coded zones, maps showing pictograms of where different things are. More than the minimum number of required accessible elements. Everything was designed to be accessible. I think the ADA, has a chart that has different, what percentage of elements should be accessible. Here they just provide ramps to get to all sorts of different elements. And then of course, I'm sure the wheelchair user can't use these things here if they're if they have a severe disability, but they can get to it and try it if they want, right? A lot of times people make the mistake of thinking that wheelchair users, either can't walk at all or they can walk. I see both ends, like, oh, well, it's just a 1 inch, 1 inch step or 4 inch curve. They can't just pop themselves over that. Well, not everybody can. And then some wheelchair users can. They can walk for short distances and move about for a little while. They can transfer. So everybody's different. And the last, comfort. Can I stay? So the first thing is providing shelter. Like I mentioned at the beginning, anytime you have a playground, really you should have some sort of shaded area. Kids get sunburned easily. Parents, they're out there in heat. So providing shelter, and this is important in certain areas, places where you're might be staying for a little while, like a place where you're doing some bird watching. Providing benches periodically along the way. Accessible picnic tables. Now, the one on the top is not one that I really care for much. The one on the bottom there, on the bottom left, is the one that I would say is the best option of these three, because it kind of looks just like every other picnic table, except it's been designed so that it's wide enough that you've got the wheelchair clear floor space that pulls up to the end of it, and the support posts are in far enough that the wheelchair user knee space goes at 17 inches deep. That provides that minimum depth at the ends. The one on the top, you can see they've just got this thing sticking out the one end of it, which makes it sort of unusable to anybody else. If there's not a wheelchair user there, it's only for wheelchair users. It can also be a hazard to blind people if they're coming across this. It might not be cane detectable depending on the height of that. So it could be dangerous if it's sticking out into a path. But they could have done the same as the one on the bottom left, right? Where if they just had those support columns in a little bit further, they could have provided knee and toe space right at the end of it. The one on the bottom right, arguably could provide greater, equality because the people can face each other as they're showing in the diagram here. But again, that space is sort of unusable if it's not being used by a wheelchair user. So I really prefer the one at the end, the one on the bottom left. But one caveat is that because the wheelchair user would be approaching from the ends, you have to make sure you've got enough path that wheelchair user is not now blocking the path, because we angled these and now that wheelchair user is sticking out into the path of travel that everyone else would use. Are we providing drinking fountains? Playgrounds, a number of times my kid's been at a playground who's like, I'm thirsty. It's like, well, where's your water bottle? I left it in the car or whatever. Providing water, especially if it's a hot day. The kids are running around, they're getting exerted. They need water more than you do, sitting there watching them. Bottle filling stations to provide them the ability to carry that bottle around with them. And it's, a little more sanitary in terms of the germs. Number of kids that I've seen just throw their mouth over that, that faucet there is kind of amazing. Providing toilet rooms. If you don't have toilet rooms, then the can I stay, that gets really short really quick, right? People know kids, it's both ends of the age spectrum, kind of want to have toilet rooms wherever you go. But, if you're there for more than 2 or 3 hours, really any age, toilet rooms are helpful for. But, again, a number of times I've brought my daughter to a playground. Actually, if she's got to go to the bathroom before you leave the house, 20-minute drive, you get there 10 minutes in, I got to go to the bathroom. And then, of course, folks, as they get older, men, prostate issues and other things, might have to go to the bathroom more often. And so, to really limit the ability to take people out, especially large groups of people, different groups, different ages and everything. I've tried to go around Disney with my parents and my daughter, and it's just every second somebody had to go to the bathroom at you got just down to the next ride. Now I gotta go. Okay. So having toilet rooms, and then you can provide toilet rooms in ways that everybody can use them. So this is an example on the screen here of toilet rooms that are not segregated by gender. So sometimes this is necessary for kids, right? I don't want to bring my daughter into the men's room past road urinals. Sometimes older adults might need assistance, especially wheelchair users, in transferring, and their spouse is the one who's assisting them. And so this concept has, this idea of having shared washrooms, having it all be open, that washing sink area is all open, and then having private compartments with doors all the way to the floors, all the way to the ceiling. Indicators that it's locked, that's occupied because you're not seeing the feet under the stall, under the compartment door. Signage that might be used for those restrooms, just having a picture of a toilet. Why mention gender at all? These different symbols, the hieroglyphic symbol in the middle doesn't really mean much to people. It doesn't have gender stereotypes in terms of the women's wearing the dress sort of thing. Just here's a picture of a toilet. It's accessible. It's got a baby changing station in it. Just very fact-based information. It's interesting to me that toilet rooms and locker rooms are typically the only rooms that don't actually say on the sign what the room is. It's usually just men, women. For what? No, it's a toilet room. That's what it is. Like auditorium, elevator, stairway, they usually have the picture of the stair and tell you what's in it. And so this is what we think is the best approach when you're going to have non-gender segregated restrooms. Example, this is at LaGuardia Airport. You're probably not doing this so much. Like there's a little higher end fancy stuff here. But notice every single sink here is accessible. It's not just the one accessible sink at the end. They have the soap and water automatic. That's great, especially in public areas where people just turn on the water and leave it on. And we all hate those spring-loaded ones that turn off too quickly, even the 10 seconds. The ADA requires that they stay on for 10 seconds, but they don't always do that. They're hard to press. What would be even better, I've seen them where they have a hand dryer here as well. So you're not taking wet hands and getting the floor all wet as you go over to the hand dryer. We know a lot of times in public places, they don't like to have paper towels because then people make a mess with the paper towels. They run out. But then the floor gets wet as people are walking around. If you're in a wheelchair and you've got wet hands, now you got to wheel your wet chair over the floor to get to the hand dryer. So it's nice to have it all in one place with icons as to how they're used. I'll skip ahead here a little bit. Adult changing tables are becoming a popular thing now in a lot of locations. And I'd say a lot of times those free civic amenities are great locations for that. Museums are a great spot for that. Free civic sort of locations where a lot of times they have groups, they take folks out for the day and they bring them around. These are adults with disabilities who need, monitoring 24/7. A lot of them need changing. And so, I see it all the time at parks and playgrounds where a bus shows up with folks from the local day hab, and they go there almost daily or every other day. And a facility like this could be very helpful for them. So let's talk about some resources that can help you out. And I'll save one resource for the end that will eventually be put up on the Canals on the website that was mentioned earlier. We're going to provide some best practices guide. I'll show you an example of one of those at the end. But what's a starting point? So the U.S. Access Board has developed a guide for outdoor developed areas. You can use this. There's also in federal facilities, this is required, as ABA, the Architectural Barriers Act applies to federal facilities, but you do have an ADA obligation if you're a public institution, or even, whether you're a state or local government, or whether you're a separate corporation that's providing services to the public, there's an ADA obligation. And so you could use this federal guide as your guide for your local stuff as well, even though it's mandated in federal facilities. Using this guide would be your start to making sure that you're, accessible. And so that resource is there. And our best practices guides will also have a link to this resource as well, some reference to it. U.S. Access Board also has guidelines for accessible voting facilities. And accessible play areas. I wanted to put it up here, but I forgot. It will be in our best practices guides. In addition to these accessible play areas, these are both from the U.S. Access Board, so this is sort of minimum stuff. But New South Wales, Australia has a best practices guide, and that's where they came up with the can I get there, can I play, can I stay, and they have little checklists that go through for playgrounds. And so if you look that up, or when you get to our best practices guys, there'll be there's a best practices guide we're going to put out on playgrounds. It'll have a link to that as well, so you can get to that directly. So these are sort of minimum ADA things. They talk a lot about the surface materials. There's been lots of studies on what constitutes an accessible play surface. So and what works, because people found different issues over time, like the rubberized surface can break down and other things. Some of our publications, this is the pink book here. Inclusive Design is a really short read. It runs through pre-design, design, construction, and occupancy phases of places. It goes through the introduction, goes through all those goals of universal design I talked about. Diversity in Design, Understanding Hidden Consequences is a textbook that we use in our freshman courses. And Universal Design, Creating Inclusive Environments is a textbook on universal design, and goes through, in detail. We use that in our graduate courses here as well. Our website, idea.ap.buffalo.edu. This is that Pittsburgh Museum Lab that was certified as universally designed. A lot of information on there and resources on universal design. Thisisud.com. So there's that building again from the beginning. This is our certification program. Generally, it applies to, right now it's for public and commercial facilities, and it's generally designed to apply to buildings, although we did certify that one playground I showed earlier. You can go to this website and you can create a free account and log in and create a project, and you can see a list of 500 universal design solutions. Most of them are for buildings, but if you're looking at, toilet rooms, if you're looking at, site stuff, parking and all of that stuff, that's all on there as well. So you could go to that site chapter and really focus on that for a lot of the outdoor stuff as well. So to summarize, before we get to questions, universal design is not the same as accessibility. Universal design benefits all. It adds value, and it is a process that enables and empowers a diverse population by improving human performance, health and wellness, and social participation. At the end, I think the message that we're really trying to get is just universal design is just good design, thoughtful design, thinking through who's using my space, how long do they want to stay there, what are they going to need when they're there, and then expanding that, and are we thinking of a wider audience than what would I need if I were there, right? What does a parent need? What do children need? What do older folks need? What do people with disabilities need when they're there? Now, I'll put this slide up again at the end. This is, I'll put this slide up, but I do want to show you an example of the best practices guide that we're going to be providing. But my contact information is up here, jrwhite2@buffalo.edu. As I said, we do consulting services. So if you're not sure, I went through a lot of information very quickly, and I'm throwing a lot of resources at you, right? But as a fee for service activity, we do, consulting opportunities, and stuff along the canal are things that we're very interested in. So we're always looking to help make that better. So I'm going to pull up this best practices guide here. So this is one of the best practices guides that will be available. We try to keep them short, down to 2 pages. Our restroom one will probably be 4 because there's so much to consider in the restroom. It might even be longer. We're trying to cut it down still. But this is the one for fishing, boating, and kayak facilities. So what we do here is we provide the key requirements here numbered, and then we give you, well, what extra things could you do to make it universally designed? Then we show a couple of examples. You might recognize some of these images from the presentation I just gave. And then, so it continues on with additional examples. I think most of these were in the presentation here. And then there's resources at the bottom. 2 of the books I mentioned are websites that I had mentioned. And these in the digital version, these will all be clickable links, of course, but we also did provide the link so that if you print this, you can go. So the idea here is it's quick, one page if you print front and back, and how to get to certain things. Sorry, Boston versus, Red Sox versus Yankees fans. I do have some Massachusetts ones in here. Some examples here from mass.gov of accessible fishing spots, training videos, all of the ADA standards. Where do I even find the ADA standards? The guides to those standards that the Access Board has put out. In this case, I have a checklist for boating facilities. I did also include a reference where you can buy what's called the A117.1 document. This is important. New York State Building Code this year, I believe it goes into effect January 1st, but don't quote me on that. The new building code goes into effect. And so if you're doing buildings or anything that's required to follow the building code, some of those space clearances are increased. And so we included that in these guides here. So we're a little ahead of the curve here for New York on what those increased space clearances are. And so, those space clearances are beyond the ADA. So particularly in restroom design, you're gonna, if that's a building that's gonna need a permit, state building code, you might want to use this 2017 document here that the new building code will reference. But we did try to include those increased space clearances, right in here, if they were there, even if it wasn't. So here, this 30 by 52 cleared floor space, even though building code doesn't apply, we put that there as a requirement, even though it's, I guess you could technically use the 48 out there. And so we're planning on doing, we've got this guide done. We're going to have a guide on parks and recreation areas. That'll be a 2-page guide. And then just a 1-page addition to that, that's on playgrounds. And then, like I said, also for toilet and restroom facilities. We figured that kind of covers, obviously, everything else beyond that. We have our This Is UD website where you can go and find out all that information as well. But we thought these would be nice, handy guides that, like, what am I not thinking of? What are those considerations that I need to do? And we also provide reference numbers to the sections in those, those regulations. So you can look at the details. Obviously, we couldn't put the whole regulation in a 2-page guide, but we try to hit most of those points and sort of summarize it the best we could for you. So again, my email and website are up here. If you have any further questions, or want to get in touch to get us involved in a future project. Otherwise, now I've left 15 minutes here to open it up for some questions. And do we want to do the questions in the chat? Would that be the best way? Or if we have people unmute themselves, it'll probably be 8 people talking at once.
Yes, we're asking folks to type their questions in the chat. So if you have any questions for Jonathan, thank you so much, Jonathan. This has been great. Please post your questions in the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing any at the moment.
Yeah, I'll give folks a minute in case, they're typing a paragraph. I'm happy to answer paragraphs.
Jonathan, while we're waiting, could you talk about the various I know you mentioned them, but the subjects or the amenities that you're covering in each one?
Yeah. So again, there's going to be the guide on the fishing and boating and kayak facilities. That's the one that I showed. That'll be a 2-page guide. There's going to be a parks and recreation facilities. It'll go over like trail surfaces, tables, seating, that sort of thing. And then like a 1-page addition to that goes into playgrounds. All the park stuff still applies to playgrounds too, but you'll have the playground equipment guide in addition to that. And then a toilet rooms guide. It won't include shower facilities, but it'll be all the toilet and sinks and that sort of thing, and getting in and all of that. That'll probably be like a 4-page guide or so, just because of all the complicated requirements there. So yeah, we'll be providing those guides, and I imagine you'll be putting them up on, I don't know if it's this website or a different one, but the access will be provided to those guides. We'll probably eventually put them up somewhere as well, just because we've got them, and so we'll make them available in some way, perhaps on our website or something at some point. And these should be available. I know you said the recording of this will be available on your website within the next week or so. These guides will be fairly quick. It's not like an end of the year thing. We're getting those done as we speak. Just needed a little more time on some of them because we said some of these are looking a little too long. We need to cut these down.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we'll include those at the resource page, and then also on the grants web page as well. So there'll be multiple areas to find it. And the guides were developed based on kind of the history of applications that we've received in the past. So we tried to find, what was the majority of the projects, and provide guidance on those. If there's outliers, again, Jonathan is a great consultant that you can talk to about it. You could also reach out to Mary or Canal Corporation, and we can help provide some insight as well.
Yeah. So we do have one question that came in here. At what point in the planning process for a project would you prefer to be contacted for consulting? I would say the earlier, the better. We often have a very long lead time. So right now we're not even accepting new projects into January or February for consulting. And so the earlier you're going to do something, the earlier we can get you on a schedule. So if hey, in the spring, we're going to be starting design of this, let us know now. The next part of that is the earlier you get us involved, the less expensive changes could be, because sometimes things get designed and then now we're saying, no, you should completely change it, or have the entrance over here, or change the slope of this, or whatever. And now it's too late. Well, this is already set in stone. We've already started the site work, or we've already done this or that. And so the earlier we're involved, the better that can be, so that we can address any issues, right? Oh, you should provide a little more space here. We can't. We've already fixed where the walls are going to be. The trusses are ordered, or whatever it is. So let's see. In your experience, I'm going to skip Tim's question because I think that might be more for you, Sasha. Erica has asked, in your experience, do universally designed projects tend to be more expensive, or is it just thoughtful design that can be done within the same budget? In our experience, it is thoughtful design that can be done within the same budget if considered early on, but they can be more expensive depending on what you're selecting. Site work can be the most expensive, so you have to do a lot of grading and stuff. That's where it gets expensive. But you can typically, the extra 7 inches here or there to provide a universally designed toilet room as opposed to a ADA compliant one doesn't really add much to the cost. You can usually figure that out within the same budget. Then the next, and then the question is it universal design versus nothing, right? So providing benches periodically, well, that's more expensive than not providing any benches at all. And same thing with providing a shelter. Providing shelter, of course, is more expensive than not providing one at all. So in that respect, it can be more expensive, but that shelter isn't just about universal design. That's a benefit, you could rent out shelters as pavilion. You could even have a money operation where you're renting shelters out for events or that sort of thing. So there are, so yes, it can be more expensive, but then the way we like to talk about it, and I kept this part of the presentation, but there's what we talk about as a value assessment, a value proposition, that yes, certain things can be more expensive, but there's added value that's going to actually bring people in. And so, people look at things like sports stadiums, right? And taxpayer dollars going to sports stadiums. And what do they think of that? Well, according to, at least to the elected representatives, they think that the public values these things and therefore they're going to spend money on them, right? And so the question is, does the public value, being able to sit and be in the shade, all of these features bring people to the project and then make the project seem successful. You spend lots of money on a project that nobody shows up to, nobody goes to, and it's like, why did we waste all this money? Why did we waste our tax dollars on this project and nobody ever goes here? I never see anybody down there. Well, but you provide all those amenities that people might attract people to come there and want to come there and want to stay there. And then suddenly people will see the value and, oh, this is a nice project that they did here. I'm glad they redeveloped this waterfront. So yes, it can be more expensive, but it can also be done in the same budget. And so it really depends. A quote to support this round of funding in November. We can provide quotes in terms of our consulting. We can provide quotes for November. Some thanks. And then I think Tim's question here, Sasha, perhaps, and maybe Jennifer's more for a question for you to answer.
Mary, do you want to answer Jennifer's question?
Yes, the grant opportunity does cover planning and design costs, if it's submitted along with the full project scope of work, I should add.
So that would be another reason, if you are planning on using any sort of consulting services, you want to get us involved earlier than later, because you will have to provide that estimate. It has to be factored into your design and construction, your design cost if you're going to include that. And we can really provide all levels of consultation too, in terms of what does it cost. I mean, we just basically bill an hourly rate or come up with an hourly rate based on what you tell us you're doing and what we need to review. Some people have us involved at every single step of the way, at multiple steps. Some people just, I just want to send you our plans, want you to look it over, provide any suggestions you have in just a little quick, email or that sort of thing. Well, that's certainly a lot faster than, no, we're going to help you, rearrange this bathroom and, send you, materials and other things, and to go through multiple rounds of design review and check for full ADA compliance and measure the grab bar heights and come while it's being built and make sure they're building it right. So there's lots of different levels we can do as well, depending on, the project and what your needs are.
There's a question about grants for Buffalo Harbor Museum. Museums are certainly eligible for this grant, so you can apply. Oh, I see. The question from Patricia Glazer is about an elevator in the building, right? And so whether or not it is eligible for the grant. Yeah, you could certainly, writing an application is really just about, writing it so that it complies with our eligibility criteria. They're not large grants, so you have to think about your project's budget, but certainly we would love to see a solution to improving an elevator.
And then I think Tim here had a question about projects and land procurement. If that could be part of the grant, I'm assuming.
So funding can't be used for land procurement. Those types of items should be secured and figured out in advance of this grant application. Property ownership management is very important to the success of these projects, particularly because we want to award the grants and spend the money within a 2-year time frame. And so land procurement can always be challenging and lengthy. Mary, anything to add to that?
No, I think you explained it well. Thank you.
Just making sure we didn't miss anything in the chat because we kind of bounced around a little bit. I think we covered it. Any other questions? Well, hearing no one go off mute or nothing in the chat, we'll conclude today's workshop. Please keep an eye out. We will send a communications notice once all the materials are ready for distribution. They will include the guides that Jonathan was mentioning. And we look forward to seeing your applications. We are very excited for this grant round, and we always are looking forward to seeing the ideas that our communities and partners and not-for-profits come up with. This is such a great program. Small grants, but big impacts, I always say. So thank you. Mary, anything to add?
I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Jonathan, for such a thorough, thoughtful presentation. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.